In this new episode of the Deep Media Pulse, we're joined by Erin Morris, VP of Global Franchise and Retail Strategy at Wildbrain, as she explores the concept of Newstalgia through examples from her company's portfolio, including Teletubbies and Strawberry Shortcake.
Good evening, I'm Veronica Orciari and welcome to Media Pulse, the first video podcast dedicated to the evolution of content, IPs and brands. And with that, let's get into a new episode of Media Pulse, together with Erin Morris, Vice President of Global Franchise and Retail Strategy at Wildbrain. Thank you for coming, Erin. I would quickly ask you to introduce yourself and what you do at Wildbrain.
I head global brand development for Wildbrain Brands. Wildbrain's a pretty big company and we have multiple divisions, but we also own our own IP. So it's my role and responsibility to make sure that we're continuing to drive those brands worldwide so that they continue to stay relevant for generations to come.
So Erin just took part in a very interesting discussion around the concept of Newstalgia. So effectively adapting adapting IPs across generations to make them new, but at the same time keeping that nostalgic feeling. So I would like you to discuss about what you do at Wildbrain around Newstalgia. You've talked about Teletubbies, you've talked about Strawberry Shortcake. I would like you to talk to our listeners to introduce what you're doing with Newstalgia.
No, absolutely. All of our IP in our portfolio is nostalgic at some level. All of our IP is a little over 20 years old, if not older. Strawberry Shortcake is an interesting one. As I came into the company, she was celebrating her 45th anniversary, and we're celebrating the world of Strawberry Shortcake in all of her iterations. And then as we started to look at how we were going to build with Gen Z, we started to stumble across that a lot of the product that we were making was in the likeness of the original look and feel of the 1980s version of her. And we were thinking like maybe we're onto something, that this Gen Z audience really was, that version of her was resonating. So we took a step back and we decided to lean into that a little bit. And so we basically took a look at all of our creative, we completely overhauled it. We also know that friendship's a really big part of any franchise DNA. And what we also realized is we weren't really highlighting her very best friends. And so with that, we really wanted to make sure that Strawberry Shortcake and her berry besties were being highlighted franchise to kind of give it a new spin, right? A new look. These characters have been part of the franchise since its beginning, but up until that time, we really weren't leaning into them. And so it's another really good example of how you can take a nostalgic property and make it new again, is kind of reinventing and reintroducing, even through creative. So that's one of the ways that we did that. And in addition, we have Teletubbies. And Teletubbies, was born here in Europe, in the UK, in 1997, and is going to be celebrating a 30th anniversary next March. And we thought, 30 years later, this Gen Z audience grew up with Teletubbies, and they're really leaning into it as adults, right, or kidults. So we're finding that our collectible business, our figure business, our fashion business is really strong, and we feel like now, as you noted, that generation is now becoming young parents, and what a perfect opportunity to pass that brand down to their children. So that's a couple of the ways that we're really working towards kind of creating nostalgia, is what do fans today want to see out of the brand, and how can we satisfy that for them?
In your presentation, you discussed about the fact that social media is a very good and quick indicator of potential success or failure of, a nostalgia approach. So how can you expand on that? How does social media impact also your strategies?
Social media is incredibly important for us, particularly with nostalgia brands. That's where kind of Gen Z, even Gen Alpha on some level, is engaging. They spend a lot of time on the platforms. So what we did is we really took a look at each of our key platforms. So we have dedicated channels for both Teletubbies and Strawberry Shortcake on TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook. And the TikTok audience wants something different than the Instagram audience, than the Facebook audience. So for each brand, we've developed separate strategies for each platform, making sure that we're giving fans what they want. Sometimes, we've tried some interesting meme-type content or video content that hasn't worked, and the fans will tell you. And so, where a lot of us would spend a lot of money on kind of character equity studies and all these things to find out about your brand, frankly, the fans will tell you pretty quickly what they love and what they don't like about how you're treating the brand. So we lean into social media. We have incredible community managers within the Wildbrain organization that run our social channels, and they do very good social listening. So we're constantly looking at the comments and the posts, the likes and the dislikes of everything across our social media landscape, whether it be Strawberry Shortcake or Teletubbies, and that helps guide our strategy.
In this sense, what would you say are your biggest fears when you're trying to approach this, nostalgia content? Because there could be a sense of fatigue when you're trying to refresh old IPs, but at the same time, there could be the fact that fans could be rejecting what you're trying to do. They that may not resonate. What are your fears, and how do you use them in a positive way to then come up with strategic ideas?
We had our worst fears kind of realized a few years ago when we launched a new series called Bury in the Big City. And, it wasn't unsuccessful, but it wasn't as successful as we hoped. And a lot of the feedback we were getting from fans was we had departed too far from the original Strawberry Shortcake. And so we started to really dig into the 4 different animated series we had over the 4 generations to think through what was in the DNA of, say, Berry Bitty Adventures, which was our animated series in the 2010s, versus and I think we took the sweetness away, we took the kind of fantastical world away, we put Strawberry Shortcake in a big city in blue jeans and a baseball cap, and I think she just lost her sweetness, and so did her friends. And so we took that feedback, we took those key learnings, and that's what really guided us strategically on the older she gets, the more fans really want to go back to the original, and fans kept telling us that. And so we listened, and so that's what helped us guide the strategy to go back more to the original classic look, but in a more modern way. So we had already made the mistake. Our fears were actually realized, but we used that moment to listen to what the fans were really looking for about the franchise, and whether she was wearing jeans or a dress, it didn't really matter. We had kind of lost the sweet, gentler time. I think for fans of Strawberry Shortcake, they love it because it's a simpler time. And we put her in a chaotic city, and they wanted the brand to kind of help calm them and, calm their fears and their pains, and we did just the opposite. So I think it's a great question, because just because you make a mistake in the brand doesn't back with fans. And frankly, we're seeing a lot of appreciation from our fans telling us that, wow, we're really glad you came back to the basics. We love the sweetness is back. We're leaning into core DNA of the franchise, we're baking again and making things and baking and creating. So with that, I think, you can make mistakes, but if you listen to your fans, you can really kind of right the track very quickly. With Teletubbies, we've basically stayed the course. Teletubbies have not changed at all in almost 30 years. So we didn't do any violent changes to that, but the other side of that is that we are thinking about some really creative ways to evolve them. So we're going to test and play a little bit with the Teletubbies, and as they approach 30, we're playing with this idea that when they were created in the likeness of a 2-year-old. And so we're playing with, how do we reinvent that show and that property, particularly fans that have been with those characters for so long. So we're thinking, what if they were 3 years old, and what world would open up to them as characters? So we're going to play with some new things. We're not sure if the fans will love it, but the beauty about digital and social is we can do small short-form content and test things, or we can put things on social media and test things. And so that's what we're going to do. So I think if we all really, but the beauty of social media is if we just listen to your fans, they're going to give you immediate feedback. So listen to it, and you can make adjustments accordingly.
One last question to Erin. So going back to what we kind of said earlier about the fact that Gen Z are now becoming, and are now becoming or have already become parents. I think this is true for every generation. You want to to kind of have your child experience the same thing you have experienced when you were a child yourself. But that's impossible because the generations have shifted and the medias have changed. So when you're trying to do that approach, how do you try and satisfy both the who already know that and they're familiar with the IP, but at the same time trying to make it resonate with generations that have not lived it?
I think for us, we're really leaning into short-form digital content. Data shows that overwhelmingly kids are watching shorter duration content on digital platforms and on various forms of devices, right? So we have to build content that supports that, particularly how children consume today. They don't consume 22-minute episodes for 30 minutes anymore. They consume 3 to 5 minutes at a time. So that's some of the way we're adapting, really just in the duration of content and where we're placing it. The other thing we're doing is leaning into what works for a preschool audience. So we've taken some existing content and reformatted it to fit more of the model of what you see as successful on digital platforms for other preschool brands. So content has also changed. So I think it's a matter of kind of trying some formats, durations, content on different platforms, and slowly over time finding what we're connecting with. But listen, I mean, we were the original Good For You television series for preschoolers. Unlike other IP, the whole idea of Teletubbies was to nurture the whole child through this really important development moment of their lives. So in addition to teaching numbers, letters, and colors, Teletubbies is intended to help with cognitive development, speech development, gross motor skills. That's why they say "uh-oh" instead of "hello," because they're just learning how to talk. And so that's why they say big hugs, and they hug in every episode, because we want to teach kind of emotional confidence. So I think it's a balance. We want to keep all the great DNA that parents want out of the content, but really finding ways to connect with children in the way that they consume content today.
Thank you so much, Erin, for being with us. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode of Media Pulse.
You've just listened to The Deep Media Pulse, Decoding Brand and Content Evolution, a video podcast powered by Licensing Magazine and Animation Journal. Thank you for listening, and see you in the next episode.